Everybody got one? We're good?
Everybody ready? Well, good afternoon. As Attorney General, my highest priority is protecting Kentucky families. Every Kentucky family deserves a good job and to be able to raise their kids in a safe neighborhood. When I came into office, I brought a four-part mission to achieve this goal. First, preventing and prosecuting child abuse. Second, better protecting our seniors against scams and abuse. Third, seeking justice for victims of rape and sexual assault. And fourth, finding workable solutions to this drug epidemic which plagues each and every one of our communities. I strongly believe that the biggest challenge and the biggest threat to Kentucky families and families all across this country is our drug epidemic. It's the single greatest threat to the lives of our families. It's taking children from parents and parents from children. Just yesterday, the governor talked about how deadly this epidemic has become, and I applaud him for having that conversation. And the deadliness is not limited to overdose deaths. Drug abuse is often, if not now, almost always the root cause of other crimes like domestic violence, child abuse, theft, scams, and human trafficking. And along with other causes like structural inequality in education, and inequality in healthcare, it's one of the major causes to the spike in violence in our large urban centers. Drug abuse is also the single greatest threat to job growth here in Kentucky. It is preventing employers from locating here. I had an East Kentucky mayor sitting in this room telling me about how she can't get a major retailer to locate in her town because they don't believe that she can find 100 workers in a 5-county area that can pass a drug screen for 3 weeks. A few counties over in Somerset, a local automotive supplier lost 46 employees in 1 day due to failed drug tests. I'm committed to doing my part as your Attorney General to end the scourge of opioid abuse and protect our Kentucky families and our Kentucky communities. We attack this epidemic every day in a number of ways in the Attorney General's office. First, our AG investigators serve on a DEA task force that goes after the worst of the worst fentanyl and carfentanil dealers, those dealers who are dealing death. Our East Kentucky Appalachian HIDA task force continues to pursue rogue doctors that would flood our communities with illicit, addictive pills. We're also on the forefront of drug policy and education. On the local level, we're hosting drug forums all across Kentucky to bring together communities and educate the public about the devastation of drugs, the educational opportunities that are out there, and even recovery options in their community that they might not know about. On the state level, we were among the first to press for new legislation to combat fentanyl and fentanyl analogs, and we pushed and we will continue to push for regulations to rein in rogue Suboxone clinics that have become this state's next set of pill mills. And on the national level, I serve as co-chair for the National Associations of Attorneys General on Substance Abuse. In that role, I've asked the White House Office of Drug Control Policy to increase funding for treatment to get our people clean, sober, back to work, and oftentimes back to their family. I've also asked the President, the Senate Majority Leader, and the Speaker of the House to make sure that whatever replacement comes down the line for the ACA, that it doesn't cut the nearly $5.5 billion in drug treatment that would have been cut from that first proposal. Today, I'm here to talk about a part of our fight against the drug epidemic that specifically falls within the role and the duty of the Attorney General. It is my duty to ensure that those companies that have profited in the billions from this flood of addictive opioids and who knew how addictive these opioids were are held responsible, become a part of the solution, and invest back in the communities that they have helped to decimate. The previous two administrations started this process with their lawsuit against Purdue Pharma. That lawsuit led this office to being able to provide over $8 million of OxyContin recovery funds to 15 recovery facilities all across this state. Those funds went to facilities such as Independence House in Corbin, Kentucky, which helps expectant mothers give birth to drug-free babies. People often describe recovery that these centers provide as one miracle, one life at a time. Well, with groups like Independence House and Corbin, oftentimes it's two miracles, two lives at a time. And we dedicated an additional $2 million from an unrelated settlement to the heroin rocket docket to get folks that are users but not dealers into treatment as quickly as possible in that legal process. That has saved a lot of money, millions upon millions for the Commonwealth, and it's also helped a lot of people and repaired a lot of families. When the General Assembly convenes again for the 2018 budget session, by that point, my office will have provided over $11 million to the general fund for their allocation. That includes the settlement we recently announced with Bryant and a settlement that I anticipate announcing tomorrow. I'm strongly encouraging our legislators to use these funds to expand treatment options, help law enforcement counter powerful drugs like fentanyl and carfentanil, and battle violence, especially in our urban areas, that is being fueled by this drug epidemic. The money that comes from groups that help cause these harms ought to be used to help people that have either been subject to addiction or to violence. I am proud of these actions by the Attorney General's office, but we must do more. We know that prescription and illicit opioids are the main cause of drug overdose deaths in this state and this nation, and we know that our heroin epidemic was born because of addiction caused by these prescription drugs and the pill mills that serve them. And because of this, as your Attorney General, I have been a part for some time now of a multi-state investigation against manufacturers and distributors of these prescription drugs. This afternoon, I'm announcing that my office is taking the next step towards filing multiple lawsuits against those that have profited from our state's tragedy. Let me be clear, there will be multiple lawsuits. To support this effort, my office will be issuing a request for proposal, or RFP, to seek support for litigations against drug manufacturers and distributors who contributed to the opioid epidemic by illegally marketing and selling opioids in Kentucky. The RFP will ensure that Kentucky tax dollars are not used to pay for the costs of these litigations, and that extra attorneys, some of the best, will be on hand to help this office represent Kentucky, that we will have the strongest possible representation against some of the largest companies in the world. This is a big step. It confirms that Kentucky will sue where the evidence supports it. Other states have already filed complaints against companies such as McKesson, AmerisourceBergen, Endo Health Solutions, Allergan, and others. In fact, West Virginia just settled with AmerisourceBergen for $16 million. Today's announcement should also serve as an invitation to any company that wants to be a part of the solution. To those companies, this doesn't have to be about blame, but can be about what their mission is supposed to be, to truly helping to heal the sick. We are willing to negotiate and work with anyone who wants to be a part of our efforts in rebuilding Kentucky families. In taking this litigation step, I will be joining a bipartisan group of attorneys general to fight against the opioid epidemic. Let me be clear, there is nothing partisan about addiction, about what these companies have helped to cause, and about the steps that need to be taken to put our families back together. It is wrong to politicize our opioid epidemic or use it against each other in this state. Too many families have died. Too many children are currently addicted. Too much depends on it, from the jobs of the future to the lives of the present. We may have different approaches, but we can all agree that holding those accountable for this tragedy is incredibly important. That those who contributed to the catastrophic damage to this state have to be a part of repairing it. The 37th Psalm states, "Depart from evil and do good, and you'll abide in him, for the Lord loves justice." This is our next step to securing that justice for our people and for all those who've been harmed, directly or indirectly, from this drug epidemic. Thank you, and I'm willing to take questions. Tom.
Have you said you filed these suits? Who have you filed them against?
We have not filed the lawsuits yet. What you are seeing today go out is an RFP for legal services to provide the support and shift the costs to a private provider. When we saw the last set of lawsuits like this that could be multiple lawsuits, those were the AWP cases, and costs in those lawsuits exceeded $3 million. So we are at the brink of litigation. We are ready to file, but we are looking for a partner to ensure that Kentucky tax dollars are not used on litigation. It may take a year or two. I want to make sure that Kentuckians are held harmless while we go out trying to secure ultimately funds that will help repair the harm of this opioid crisis.
This will be on a fee contingent basis, though.
Yes.
That was my question. How does that work without paying it?
Well, the RFP will go out on a contingency basis. Whichever group wins will not be paid $1 unless we have an actual settlement or a win. At the same time, they will pay for all of the costs that it takes in moving this litigation on. What it means is that there's no financial risk to Kentuckians, but I expect that there will be significant recoveries. If you look at what West Virginia has done recently, I believe they brought in over $30 million. That's something I would like to see go to drug treatment.
Just to be sure, would this exclude a law firm that may have a former governor in it?
We don't exclude on the upfront anyone from bidding. Anyone from bidding will have to identify who would be on their team, and we'd look at it from there. I don't think that law firm has ever bid on contingency fee contracts.
Do you have a copy of the RFP that you can share with us?
I believe we finalized it, and we will have it for you. There are one thing in it that you might find interesting. We ask for firms or groups, they're not always, they can be individuals that are bidding. We encourage them to bid against the caps that were in the previous House bill that Representative Nemes filed. It's not mandatory, but we thought, given that this is something that the legislature is interested in, and in an effort to work with them, that it could get us data back, actual data, about how many groups on this type of RFP would bid against the caps, if people would bid under them, or if some of them wouldn't bid the cap at all. So at least when we head into the next General Assembly, where I expect them to have the same type of bill, that we can have actual data that can guide the conversation.
When you said bid against, you're saying bid within those gaps or complying with those
Yes,
gaps?
we are encouraging them to bid against the exact caps that we're in. What we're encouraging them to do is bid under it. I anticipate that there are some firms that will say, with the risk and the costs, we're not willing to bid in that tiered system, but we're going to find out. I think it's fair that when we have those bills that come up, that we ought to have real data, and it may shape what my beliefs are, or at least the level of any opposition that we may have. Those do not exist in 38 states, or are higher in their caps in 38 other states. It makes us less competitive, but we'll figure out how much less competitive.
What's the timetable on it before you select it?
Well, I believe responses are going to be due back in 30 days, 30 or 45 days. That's in the RFP. From there, it'll still have to be scored and a contract to be entered. And my hope is during that period that any company that wants to be a part of the solution, that is willing to provide some portion of the billions of dollars that they have made on these opioids that have ravaged our communities, if they want to come to this office directly and talk about ways that they can be of help and to potentially settle claims, we're open to talking about those in that interim period. Let me take one from the back, and I'll...
Sir, I'm with Wave 3 TV. I just want to read this question I just
Sure.
got from the newsroom. The Republicans just finished a teleconference alleging conflicts between AG Beshear and prior AG Conway with the Purdue Pharma settlement over OxyContin use. In response?
Well, let me first say it's silly and shame on President Stivers. We're here talking about combating the opioid epidemic and holding those accountable that have ravaged his district, more so than most accountable. And to use this type of press conference or preempt this type of action with a political shot when it deals with opioids and the lives of our family, that ought to be beneath him. And let me tell you, President Stivers, up until this call, loved this settlement. The $450,000 that went to the Independence House in Corbin, he participated in. In the press release, he provided a comment on how great it was. We provided him the check while he was there, and he even posed for pictures and talked about how important it was. I remember him even complimenting Jane Beshear, my mom, on all the work that she had done to fight this addiction crisis. I guess a lot changes when your income is dependent on an at-will job of your spouse for the governor.
Sir, it's a two-part question.
Okay.
The other one they sent me is that Stivers says he wants to intervene with the case to get sealed documents open to the public. Any response?
Well, I can just tell you this office is see multiple defendants, most likely in separate lawsuits, but perhaps together depending on how the conduct might relate to each other.
And then I also wanted to ask, yesterday a report came out from the state talking about just the number
Right.
of overdoses we had last year. It continues to rise. You know, you're having this press
Right.
conference today. Is there an urgency now looking at just how much
Yeah.
worse this epidemic seems to be getting?
There's been an urgency since the moment I stepped into office, if not before. Both the last administration in the Attorney General's office and the Governor's office pushed hard on settlements to apply them to drug treatment. But we have more people dying every single day. That thing that our parents told us when we were growing up, that the first time you try drugs, they might kill you, it is real now. Carfentanyl will kill you the first time you try it. And we've got kids that are growing up that when we tell them that aren't going to believe it necessarily. And then we got kids that make one mistake and are going to suffer from a lifetime of addiction. I mean, this is the challenge of our times. Whether Kentucky will move forward, whether it's economically or just for the betterment of the lives of our people, depend on this. They can pass whatever laws they want to related to economic development, but if our people aren't healthy, if they're suffering from addiction, we wouldn't be able to fill the type of good jobs that we want to come to the state, and they're not going to come here until we're on top of this. Yes, Adam?
When you were at Stites and Harbison, did
Yes.
you do any work for Purdue Pharma?
I wasn't a named counsel on that, and I don't recall doing any work on it. I was there a long time. I don't want to suggest that no one asked me a question about what General Conway was like or not like, but I was not an active participant in that case.
And President Stivers gave a detailed account of this today. And what he was basically alleging was that Stites and Harbison was in trouble because of the whole admissions problem. I think you'll remember that. About the question about missing the deadline. The Supreme Court was asked to rule on that. I don't think they ever did.
Okay.
But he basically said that in order that this case was settled for two reasons. One,
Right.
to avoid a conflict of interest with you coming into office because you wouldn't be able to take the case. And number two, to save Stites and Harbison from a potential.
You think Jack Conway wanted to
malpractice.
save Stites and Harbison?
Well, that you or.
All right.
or
Well,
Dr.
Adam-
Beshear might have been. That's what all he's saying.
Adam, I'm aware that you've talked to Jack Conway. He was kind enough to call me, and that he walked through all the reasons that he settled that lawsuit, that he told you it was entirely untrue. I wasn't a part of it at all. I think he detailed all those reasons, and you know, I think you're aware of the actual reasons that it was settled. Had nothing to do with me. At that point, I was not an equity partner of Stites and Harbison. Would not have impacted me on any level whatsoever. My dad didn't decide to go back to Stites and Harbison until he was done. So, no, entirely untrue. And again, I mean, shame on President Stivers. We're here talking about the next set of lawsuits to hold these companies accountable for the tragedy that they've created, something he was in favor of when we were providing $450,000 of OxyContin settlement funds to the Independence House, something he showed up for, took pictures for, even complimented my work, the past Attorney General's work, as well as Jane Beshear's work. This should not be political. And that's what President Stivers' comments were today. If we can't rise above partisanship when we're talking about the opioid crisis, then what hope do we have? So I'd say directly to President Stivers, when we're talking about something that is killing more than 3 people a day, when we're talking about fentanyl and carfentanyl, leave your politics at home. I know that $100,000 job that the governor has provided to your spouse, who he could let go at any time, creates pressure. But this is far too important. It's far too important.
It's off topic, but I want to ask you if
Sure.
you had any comment on California's ban on state-sponsored travel to Kentucky and whether you plan on taking any sort of counteraction in response to that.
Well, in the end, any type of real counteraction is going to require the California Attorney General to change his mind. And I would just say that if our legislature truly wants Kentucky to be open for business, if we truly want to attract all different types of jobs and not be left out for any reason from anyone looking across the country, then we're going to have to be very careful and very aware of what certain laws on social issues may result in as far as a company's willingness to locate in Kentucky or another state's willingness to do business in Kentucky.
And just as a follow-up to that, in an interview with us today, Governor Bevin compared you to California's Attorney General and said, in the sense that you both take actions, in the governor's words, out of political ambition rather than what's best for the state. And he also said you should do more in response to this travel ban. And I just want your reaction to that.
Well, I know the governor has taken it very personally that we've had to sue him, where now we have 3 active cases. And he takes it very personally. I think he said something like, I have 80-something lawyers that work for me, and all they do is sue the governor. So I did a quick tally today, and we have over 1,300 active cases in the AG's office. 3 of them involve the governor. That's about 0.22 or 0.23%. So it's not about the governor. It doesn't have to be personal. I'm just doing my job. So if we could cut out the name calling, if we could cut out some of the crazy conspiracy theories, apparently we in this room are all in a conspiracy against him. So you can judge the source by those allegations, then we could do a lot more together. I mean, government's not supposed to include the name calling, the crazy allegations, and the rest, and it makes it very hard to work together when that's the atmosphere. Yes, Chris?
Along the lines of the decision by the California Attorney General, there were LGBT activists who have said that they thought that the law that passed in Kentucky wasn't even aimed at their community and it was highly unlikely that it would impact their community. Do you think that AG Beshear was politically motivated in his move to add Kentucky to the list? And would you suggest that he maybe give Kentucky a second look?
Well, sure, I'd suggest that he give Kentucky a second look. Whether this law will result in the activities that the California AG is concerned about, we'll know pretty soon. He's worried that it may be used to exclude certain students from student groups. We're going to know that when school comes back in session. So we're going to learn a lot about the impact of the bill, but what we have to understand is if this supermajority's #1 goal is job growth, when they pass these types of social legislation, that there are going to be impacts. You know, there are CEOs out there of major Fortune 10 or 100 companies that may refuse to either do business or locate in Kentucky because of some of this legislation. And anytime we pass legislation, we have to look at the intended and the unintended consequences. And if we don't foresee that, and it causes a major economic impact, then shame on us.
General,
Yes?
one clarification question.
Sure.
When you said you were no longer an equity partner at Stites and Hardison at the time of the settlement, I interpret that to mean you received no income because of that settlement. Is that
Correct.
Okay. And number 2, I understand about the political shot and the rising tensions that are going on between Stivers in this office and especially the governor in this office.
Right.
Is bringing Mrs. Stivers into it lessen that heat or temperature any?
Probably not. Probably not. But I have serious concerns that we have a major incursion from the executive branch into the power of the legislative branch. That has been the main emphasis of every single lawsuit that I've filed. From the university budget case, where the governor claimed that the budget that the legislature passes, its #1 function was just advisory, and that the governor got to decide what to spend within certain ceiling limits. That would have been the single largest incursion into legislative power, their #1 constitutional duty this state has ever seen. And President Stivers sided with the governor. That's given away everything that your branch does. And that's very concerning to me. And these boards, each one's been set up by a specific statute that President Stivers' legislature has done hearings on. You know how many hearings there have to be. Have heard from experts, have structured, have set terms for, have staggered those terms, have determined when they want the boards to hire their own executive directors to be even more independent, and what their powers and duties are. And after all that work, the governor is rewriting virtually every single one of them through an executive order. And President Stivers is going along with it.
What do you think he has more to fear from from the Attorney General wanting to spend settlement money or from a governor writing executive orders?
Well, the interesting thing about his opposition to the way that money has been done in the past, that SETAC settlement, is he claims that the legislature is in charge of spending and that this office can't, via its own executive order or a judicial order, determine where it goes. Yet when the governor did the same thing to universities, the exact same thing, walking into the power of spending, he sided with the governor. Now, to me, that seems entirely political when it's the same issue, and you oppose it when it's a Democrat and you're for it when it's a Republican. I've been consistent the entire time I've been in here. I have never tried to direct settlement funds outside of the legislature, that spending falls within their constitutional powers. Again, I'm standing up for their powers, even if they don't.
General, one more question about what Stiver said. He said something about you should have gotten some type of ethical clearance from the Kentucky Bar Association. Is that necessary? Did you get that at all, or ask them for that?
The case is fully settled
But what about the
and
Stiver
over.
Records case? That's
Those decisions haven't been made by me. They've been made by the chief deputy. But there's no adversity between Purdue Pharma and the Commonwealth in that case at all. Our Commonwealth is absolutely bound by 2 court orders. If we violated those court orders, 2 things would happen. 1, we'd have violated the law. And number 2, the whole settlement would be undone. In other words, that $450,000 that went to Corbin House, that has resulted in numerous babies being born drug-free, would be gone.
Anybody else?
You're saying the Commonwealth is bound by 2 court orders for you not to take a position on the unsealing of the document?
For the office, too. And specifically what those are is the settlement agreement, which incorporates a protective order, both entered by the last administration. And the protective order specifically outlines the documents that are being sought in the open records. And it's not an open records case, in an unsealing of the record case. Open records don't apply to the judicial branch, as you all know.
And then you mentioned, obviously, you're not really sure how many lawsuits are going to be filed in the end.
That's right.
Have you identified any companies that you are for sure going to sue once you get this RFP done? And if so, who are they?
We specifically name one in the RFP, and that's McKesson. Though I think that the major manufacturers of opioids outside Purdue, which we settled with before I came into office, should be on notice, as should the major wholesalers.
Anybody else?
All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.